Good morning and welcome to the December 2020 meeting of the Food Standards Agency. Once again, we're meeting virtually, but for the purpose of the record, the meeting is deemed to take place in Cambridge, which is where I am at the moment. If you're joining us and not a regular attender at our meetings, you might find this quite a short FSA board meeting. That's because we have split our quarterly regular business of the board into three parts at the moment. So 2 weeks ago, we took a series of regular assurance and oversight reports as the board. We're focusing on two strategic papers today, and we have a business committee meeting next week, which will be looking at operational matters. Could I ask the board if anyone has any conflicts of interest to declare in relation to today's agenda? And whether there are any items of other business that haven't been raised with me? No, in which case, thank you. I'll hand over to Stephen Pollock, our Director of Communications, to read out a question that we've received in advance of the meeting. Stephen.
Thank you, Heather, and good morning, everybody. Yes, we've received one question today, and it's from Paul Hisco, who's the founder and managing director of a company called scoresonthedoors.org.uk. It's a company that uses food hygiene rating scheme and other data to support business compliance. Mr. Hisco's question makes specific reference to the update paper on the food hypersensitivity programme, an item on today's agenda, and in particular to the consumer information screens described in Annex 3 of the paper. Mr. Hisco's company has wanted to publish allergen scores on its website, but has been dissuaded from doing so because of issues around reliability. He points out that the Codex International Standard for Allergen Management recently reached the approved for use Step 8 stage, and he had expected that this might be put forward for adoption as the basis of a UK standard by the FSA. So Mr. Hisco asks, I was therefore surprised not to see any reference to Codex in the paper. It would be interesting to understand your views as to how Codex fits into this work and whether it might be considered as part of the programme in future. And that's all the questions we have today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Stephen, and we may well be able to pick that point up during our discussion on food hypersensitivity. In any case, the question and the answer will be not only shared with the questioner, but will be published on our website within the next 2 weeks, as is normal practice. The minutes of our board meeting on the 18th of November, with thanks to the Secretariat for turning that round so quickly, board members have had a short opportunity to consider the draft minutes. Are we content that they're an accurate record of our meeting? Thank you very much. There's a note of actions arising which have been completed. Board members may have anything to ask about that, but I also felt that I might just ask the Chief Executive if she'd be happy to update us on where we got to with export health certificates and support from our veterinary and MHI staff in relation to that. You might want to pick it up here, Emily, or do you want to pick it up under the EU exit, EU position paper?
I'll come in after Rebecca, after she introduced the EU exit, if that's okay.
That's great, thank you very much. In which case, the general reports to the board, in terms of my report, we've only met 2 weeks ago and I haven't had any engagement since then. So there's nothing to report in that regard. As board members know, this will be my last scheduled board meeting as chair of the FSA board, as a member of this board. I do regret to say that the process to recruit my successor still has not begun formally. I did write to ministers in the 3 countries where we operate on the 1st of December 2019 to give them notice of my leaving this role. I do expect an interim chair to be appointed very soon. It's a matter of regret that I can't say any more about that today, but I am confident that the board will be in good hands on an interim basis. I formally stepped down on the 31st of January 2021. And I'm going to have the chair's privilege of reserving a right to add some any of the business at the end of the meeting, because I always like to have the last word, as the board knows very well. So I might just make some concluding remarks then. Any questions for me as chair on that non-activity over the last fortnight? In which case, we shall move on to our first substantive paper, which is the update on EU transition. We've got Rebecca Sudworth and Catherine Bowles joining us, together with Angela Junena and Theo Hawkins. And I did just want to say, this is Catherine's last board meeting too. So, gosh, we're going out in style, Catherine, together prior to her retirement. She's got a much longer and more distinguished history of service with the FSA than I have. But it's very nice to be sharing the moment with you, Catherine. I shall hand over to, I think, Rebecca, are you starting?
I'll just say a very few words, and Catherine then will summarise the main points in the paper. So I just wanted to thank Catherine for her work over many years, and to confirm that as we say in the paper, I think we are in good shape. We've focused on readiness within the FSA, and we've outlined the key areas that we've been working on in the paper, and also we've been focusing on our support for business, making sure that our stakeholders know what they have to do in respect of the areas that we're responsible for. As you know, there are a number of areas where we're part of a wider system, imports, exports, and the implementation of border controls is a good example of that. And we're continuing to work really, really closely across government and across all the nations and regions of the UK in order to make sure that we are as prepared as we can be. So I'd like to invite Catherine just to summarise some of the key points, if that's all right.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, and thank you very much, Heather, for those kind words. Yes, the paper you have before you today, I think, hopefully provides as comprehensive an indication of our state of preparedness for the end of the transition period at the end of this calendar year. As Rebecca has said, there are elements in here where we are heavily reliant on activities by other government departments and other actors, and we are doing our level best to be contributing effectively and determinedly with colleagues to make sure that we are indeed ready. And there are areas which are within our own gift, and where I think our assessment is we feel we are in a good place in relation to being ready to operate at the end of the transition period. I think what I draw out in relation to our activities and our preparedness, I would cite our risk analysis process has been tested, and we will begin undertaking UK-based risk assessment work from the 1st of January, including accepting applications for regulated products. In relation to our incident handling, resilience, and the National Food Crime Unit, we've put in place information sharing systems across all 4 nations and provided a reactive resource for the end of the transition period, and in order to be able to respond to the additional challenges we foresee coming at the end of this year in relation to COVID and the usual winter planning pressures. Across the imports piece, the FSA has a vital role in relation to food and feed safety, and we have contributed fully to the DEFRA-led border operating model. And whilst we are reliant on the DEFRA systems in relation to importing food and feed, we're confident that there are contingency arrangements in place should they be needed as we move through the process of rolling these out. We have now confirmed the new health and ID marks to be used, including how they can be used in advance to enable businesses to be fully prepared, and have worked across the piece with colleagues in the FSA, DEFRA, and in Northern Ireland Executive to ensure a risk-based approach to enforcement for these. We have put in place a number of elements of support for businesses to help them get ready. So in addition to publishing our guidance on health and ID marks, we have provided webinars on the risk analysis process, where in excess of 800 people registered to attend them. And we are contributing to a range of central government-led activities, such as webinars aimed at both EU and rest of the world countries, so that we are addressing both ends of the supply chain. And we are also providing a range of training materials for local authorities. I think it's fair to say, however, that the outstanding challenges remain primarily in relation to the Northern Ireland Protocol. And these, I think, are inevitably a product of the fact that negotiations in this area with the EU in order to give full effect to the detail of the protocol and its impact are being continue to be held as we speak, and therefore I'm afraid things are being sorted out at very much the last minute, and we are fully engaged and very focused on making sure that we maintain our responsibility for food safety issues in relation to Northern Ireland, and that we are continuing to be guided by the principles that the board set for us in relation both to this aspect of negotiations and to the element that remains in relation to the free trade agreement with the EU. The paper also references some of the activities we are undertaking in relation to other free trade agreements, and as I've mentioned, the most significant area we are focusing on at the moment is the in relation to the EU ongoing negotiations, which, as you will have seen, are indeed still ongoing and reaching a hopefully a final phase. I think the final thing I'll draw attention to, which is in the paper, is in relation to work on the UK frameworks for which the FSA is either wholly or partially responsible, and we have brought specific papers to the board about this in the past. And what we have focused on in the paper before you is the food compositional standards and labelling framework, which is a DEFRA-led policy initiative in respect of England, and where we are inviting the board to agree that the approach that's being taken to this framework is consistent with the approach that's being taken to the others that you have already received papers on. So thank you. I'll close my comments there and leave it open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I think there's an awful lot in this paper, and rightly so. This is a really important point for the board in terms of assuring ourselves about readiness and remaining risk, and the way in which we're trying to mitigate those remaining risks as we move out of the transition period, as well as looking ahead in terms of the challenges of the Northern Ireland Protocol around imports and exports, and then some important assurance and direction around food compositional standards and labelling. But I think, particularly from the board's point of view, if we can focus on any questions the board have got about readiness and risk, that would be really helpful for this this particular board discussion. Comments, questions? Deep breath. I'm trying to see if anyone's got their hand up. Oh, loads have. Emily first. Sorry, that wasn't coming up for me. Emily.
Thanks, Heather. I just wanted to make a couple of comments about our overall readiness, and then I'll talk about export health certificates as well. So in terms of our overall readiness, I think the paper sets out really well what we've put in place and how we're going to be as ready as we can for the 1st of January. I just want to repeat what I said at the last meeting, though, which is that there will be things that are unexpected and that we haven't been able to prepare for. And that's because the change that the UK is about to go through is big bang. It's a significant change to the economic model, and it's all happening overnight, which is a difficult way of doing change. So, you know, tariffs are being introduced, there'll be certification, there's new IT systems that exporters and importers have to use. There are new people who have to operate them, who've had to learn new skills, and so on. So for me, it's not just what we've done to prepare so far that's important, it's how agile we're going to be in January that is also important. And the questions we've been asking ourselves in the last few weeks are, have we got the right feedback loops in place? So have we got enough contacts and relationships that we're going to get intelligence as we need? Do we have people available with the right skills in January so that we can quickly solve issues? And in fact, we've done a pause on annual leave so that we do have people available and that they're not overworked. Do we have good relationships with others around government? Because this is often a team sport. And do we have the rhythm of daily meetings that we can pick things up? So the process by which we will respond is as important now as the things that we've done to put things in place. Export health certificates is a very good example where it's a thing that's emerged and we need to deal with quickly. So DEFRA have made a request to the FSA, as they have to Animal and Plant Health Agency as well, for some help from our vets and meat hygiene inspectors with some of the signing off of export health certificates in order to improve capacity. We have offered a number to train a number of our internal official vets, and we're also offering to train a high number, so over 100 meat hygiene inspectors to do some attestation certification support too, which we think will make quite a difference. DEFRA have been very grateful for that, and they're very clear, as we are, that we don't want to undermine the FSA's official control work. That comes first. We must make sure that food is safe for consumers in the UK. But where we do have a bit of extra capacity, we will try and help with the exports work too. But that will be time limited. This is something that the food industry needs to work out for itself, actually. We're just there to try and help with the transition. So we'll review our arrangements at the end of January. And if there, for any reason, so for example, because of staffing, COVID, whatever, we're not able to offer that support, we won't do so in January because the official control work is the priority.
Emily, thank you for that, and very well said. I think you've positioned where we are and the challenges ahead incredibly clearly there. Thank you. Margaret.
Thank you, and thank you to Catherine. So sorry that we haven't been able to see you much this year. And thank you so much for some incredibly detailed briefings, which have kept us on the straight and narrow over the EU in particular, and you will be missed. And thank you also, very detailed, very clear paper, but a very worrying paper, I think. You know, 4 weeks to go, the deal's not done. We've got some infrastructure still isn't in place. That's not to do with us, I know. Training still ongoing. Some of the IT systems not yet launched. Certification, which Emily's just raised, still an issue. So I think it has to be a huge thank you to all your team who are just doing everything you possibly can to make sure this will go smoothly. And I think it will, from the work that you're putting in, and you do seem to notice where the risks are. I think it's a nightmare for the food industries. It brings risks for consumers going so close to the line. Northern Ireland Protocol I'm going to put aside because I'm sure colleagues are going to go there. I just have two very small questions, actually three now. Are we in DEFRA cutting it a bit fine on IPAFs, or are we happy that when it does, the UK traceability system, or England's, are we cutting it a bit fine by the fact that it isn't actually up and running quite yet, but will have to be by the 1st of Jan? The second one is, will there be any risk-based checks and controls on incoming high-risk food and feed? I couldn't quite work that one out. Between the 1st of Jan and the 1st of July next year, it's detailed on page 26. Doesn't quite make it clear. If there isn't clearly, there may be a risk there. And then just finally on what Heather just said about the export health certificates, obviously, if we have got meat inspectors and vets going over at a crucial time to help with that, the question over, what they've been doing otherwise, and are we happy that there are no gaps there? I think you've kind of answered that, Emily, but it is an issue maybe worth mentioning. Thank you.
Margaret, thank you. I'm going to let, think possibly Rebecca come back on the controls thing, but probably for newer board members, some of us have been through this so long ago, it's always salutary to remind ourselves. The board from the start took the view that for imports from the EU, the growth in the possibility of risk was not immediate overnight. And so the board has always had a higher level of tolerance for when controls would be introduced on imports from the EU, because obviously we leave the regime fully on one day, and the next day there's no particular reason why the food would be more risky or less safe. And that's driven the tolerance threshold we put from the start around when IPAFs will be switched on for particular kinds of imports. Rebecca, do you want to say any more about that?
Yeah, I'll make some general points, then I'll ask Catherine to pick up some of the details. So yes, on IPAFs, yes, it is cutting it fine, but as we emphasised before, we're part of a broader system here and reliant on working with DEFRA and other partners to put some of these systems in place. I believe actually that IPAFs, I think there may even be one aspect of IPAFs that now is available for live use, and it's going live very shortly, and we have been working very, very closely with DEFRA on their contingency plans, so we're really clear what will happen if there are any problems. Just moving on to your question about risk-based controls. Yeah, as Heather says, we've been really clear about our responsibility for this. Again, this is part of a broader system of checks and controls that are still under negotiation in some aspects, but we've looked very carefully at what we think is the safety risk here, and we are satisfied that there is no additional risk to the approach that's being proposed. And I'll just ask Catherine, actually, if you want to add anything on those 2 points.
Thank you, Rebecca. I think the only thing I'd add, just to give a complete picture, is that in relation to high-risk food not of animal origin, full checks will still be in application for that commodity coming from third countries. It's only in relation to what's coming from the EU where there's an expectation of a phased approach to the controls. And I think as well, just to re-emphasize the fact that we are additionally enhancing our surveillance and other activities. So as the chair and as Rebecca have said, in addition to our kind of baseline risk tolerance here, we're also making sure that we're garnering additional information to allow us to understand what is happening in the food chain. Thank you. Thank you
for that. And I don't know whether, Emily, did you want to come back with any further assurance on Margaret's point about what our meat hygiene inspectors would have been doing otherwise? Or Colin?
I think Colin should comment on that, actually, if he can do the details.
Yeah, very, very happy to. In respect of the vets that we're talking about training and making available to DEFRA as part of the overall solution, we're talking about our managers in the system. So these are people that we've used as our pressure valve for the COVID response. So it's done very much on the basis that if we manage to deal with the COVID pressures, we will have those managerial vets available. We'll also have MHIs available, but it's very much on the basis that it will not be a sustainable long-term solution and is a pressure valve for a surge in January.
Thank you for that. Timothy.
Thanks, and thanks to all the team for such a tremendous effort. This represents a huge amount of work, and really recognise how much the team has put into it. And I guess with that is that the situation is incredibly dynamic, and I take Emily's point about being agile. One of my particular issues, I guess, is around exports. We touch on it in 4.9 on the paper, and whilst on imports, we might have got some scale of understanding around what we may experience, recognising that not all changes will be overnight. I know with exports, there could be issues for us in relation to divergence. And I just wondered whether, rather like the Trichinella example, there's an understanding of the scale of other examples that might impact on us and what our strategy is for dealing with that.
Thank you. I'm going to collect up a couple of comments and then invite colleagues to come back. Peter.
A couple of points. First of all, we're talking about the agreement, which we hope will come out in the beginning of January, in the next couple of weeks, as being the agreement. And I'd just like to flag up as potential demand for further effort that there could be issues which are left unresolved because the parties are brushing them over for the time being in order to get an agreement. So it may be that further work is going to have to be carried out in the next few months, and that we're going to need to be pretty flexible and nimble in responding to how things actually develop on the ground. Second thing is, I'd like to flag up the Port of Hollyhead. When our Welsh committee met last week, there were a lot of concerns expressed about the kind of problems that Hollyhead, where a lot of exports to Ireland pass through, would find itself in major difficulties of various sorts. Some that were mentioned were about the requirement to check loads that have been grouped, the difficulty of checking loads that have been so grouped. And the other thing mentioned was that there was potential for food fraud and crime associated with pre-notification, enabling controls to be circumvented. Now, those comments were made by people who had an intimate knowledge of the way things operate in Hollyhead, and they were certainly concerned. The other broad thought is that Wales is a major exporter of lamb, and there are general concerns about the way the whole thing is going to operate, both in terms of tariffs and in terms of delays, that could have a huge impact on that aspect of the Welsh economy, which results from, of course, our geography and mountains and sheep and so
on. I'm sorry, I lost the I lost connection there, so I wasn't able to hear most of what Peter was saying until I could dial in for another gadget.
Did others hear me?
I think the others did. It was just me, Peter. Yes, everybody else did.
Okay, thanks.
So could I ask one of the officials to decide who needs to pick that up in Timothy's earlier point, because I was trying to reconnect. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine, Heather. I'm happy to make a few comments and answer some of those questions. So going back to, so Tim, you asked a broader question about divergence and what our approach was going to be in relation to exports. And I think it's so it's a strategic question, I think, and I'd answer it in three parts. Firstly, that we're very conscious that it's our job to make sure that the requirements for business are really clear. Both obviously from January we have taken all of the requirements of European legislation into our own law, so everyone understands the starting point. Over time, if things do diverge, we have a responsibility to be really clear about what we require in the UK and make sure businesses understand that. But also to understand the impact of any changes in regulation on our trade agreements and ability to export as well, which is one of our roles. And we also have a future role to play in providing the assurance that underpins trade deals in terms of the controls that we do have in place and being able to meet other countries' requirements as well. So we're very conscious of our role in all of those areas, and we're already doing a lot of work to make sure that we're completely embedded across government with external stakeholders and that our communications are really excellent in all of those respects. Moving on to Peter's comments and questions, yeah, absolutely take the point that we're going to need to be really agile after the 1st of January. I think it goes back to Emily's point that there are, we can't predict all of the challenges that will come our way, but we need to make sure that we have the skills and the systems and the processes in place to deal with them as they do arise. And as is noted in the paper, we've stood up now our winter planning incident response system, and if issues arise that need to be dealt with really quickly, and we need to respond either as the FSA or as part of a cross-government response, we have tried and tested mechanisms to ensure that we do that in a timely fashion. You asked about Hollyhead, which is obviously a particular issue of concern in Wales. So I can say that the FSA is very closely involved in the cross-government working on the issues that you raised, particularly around grouped consignments. And you know, we're alive to those issues, and as I think was discussed at WFAC, we're working to understand what those issues are and make sure that that they're not going to cause any issues. And then you made a comment about the importance of you know, having an efficient and effective export system for the Welsh economy, and absolutely agree. And I think one of the things we've done really well over recent months in particular is to work extremely closely with our meat industry stakeholders. Once again, some of the issues at hand are ones where we are part of a broader government system, and but I think that the quality of our communications and our responsiveness has been excellent, and we'll continue to work in that way.
Thank you for that, Rebecca. Emily, do you want to come in, and then I've got Colm?
Thank you. Just to supplement a little what Rebecca said, I just want to be extremely clear that the questions of exports largely sit with DEFRA. And the FSA is responsible for what food is consumed inside the UK, the safety of that food. And we put the consumer interest at the top of that consideration. So some of the questions about, you know, tariffs and export health certificates and lamb and so on are very much questions for DEFRA and the Welsh equivalent, because obviously they link to international trade, which is a reserved matter. The exception, I would say, in relation to Tim's point, actually, is as we think about what products are coming from Great Britain into Northern Ireland. Now, those products at the moment, without further agreement between the joint EU and UK,
we're having one of those days.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we lost you at products coming into Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Emily.
Okay, apologies. So the question about what exactly the certificates and the standards are that those products need to meet is still unclear, because that committee negotiation between the EU and the UK has not yet concluded. So that is where our work with port health authorities in Northern Ireland is so important, and which Maria is leading on.
Thank you for that. Going to Colm and then Ruth.
Sure, thank you, and thank you very much, team, for a very clear and concise paper. And thank you, Catherine, not just for this work, but for what you've done, certainly over the time that I've been involved with the Food Standards Agency. You've been absolutely a tremendous support to the board. I've just a couple of questions around, I suppose, three areas in particular. Interested in terms of stakeholder engagement, what we've done both nationally and in the Northern Ireland context, and what's our assessment of how ready FBOs are for what's about to come down the line after the 1st of January. The second question at paragraph 418 talks about the possibility of Northern Ireland continuing to have access to the EU's RASIF system, but it's not entirely clear that that will be the case. I suppose what's our sense in the likelihood of that being sort of coming to a good conclusion, and if you could say just a little bit about what the alternative is if that isn't the case. And then the final question, and it's probably one that you may or may not be able to sort of comment on in relation to the Northern Ireland Protocol. There has been a lot of discussion in the last sort of 24, 48 hours around goods at risk, and Emily just touched a little bit on that. And this is goods that are coming from GB to Northern Ireland, which may end up crossing a fairly open border into the EU through the Irish Republic. I'm probably a little bit concerned with food coming the other way through that open border, and we haven't seen anything referring to a definition of a Northern Ireland qualifying good, because there would be a concern, both from a food crime perspective and a food safety perspective, as to what could come across the border if we don't get a definition of that tied down pretty quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ruth, do you want to raise your points, and then we'll ask colleagues to come back?
Thank you. This paper's excellent in setting out the challenges and the issues that the team have worked on extensively and very effectively. I welcome Emily's comments about the need to be flexible. 1st of January, there will be predictable things and unpredictable risks emerging. And I'm assured that there's an extensive approach to managing those situations and some contingency in place. My question is, are we satisfied that we've got sufficient links across each of the nations that we're engaged with? There'll be separate responses in each of those, as well as the strength of the UK-wide relationships, in particular with FSS Scotland. Have we got sufficient confidence we have the intelligence sharing that we're going to need to know whether risks are emerging on a slow pace to see those coming, or the immediate risks? So just seeking some assurance that we're satisfied those systems are ready to go.
Thank you. Rebecca, do you want to start?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Shall I? So starting with the comms questions. So Colm, you asked about stakeholder engagement, and yes, this has been extensive, as we've touched on in the paper. And that's across businesses specifically. Catherine mentioned the work that we've done alerting business to the new system of regulated products approvals, with local authorities as well, and with representative bodies. We've been part of extensive cross-government working and engagement with representative bodies in all sectors as part of the wider preparations. I wonder if Maria could add anything on the specific engagement in Northern Ireland, because I know that that has also been extensive.
Maria, if you'd like to come in, and then Emily has something to say.
Very happy to, Heather. Thank you. Yes, Colm, we actually have been participating in DEFRA-led industry workshops. The latest one was last week, and there were 500 businesses, actually not all Northern Ireland businesses, some Republic of Ireland businesses and businesses from GB joined that seminar as well. But there's an extensive Q&A that has been generated from that, and that will be published as well. So that picks up all of the concerns that businesses raised at that webinar. We've also uploaded all of our guidance onto the Invest Northern Ireland Business Info portal, and that has been getting really good feedback as well from businesses. There is 2 more of these webinars planned over the next couple of weeks, so we're doing all we can to get the message out to businesses. But it's fair to say, and certainly the Executive Office is very worried about business engagement and worried about business preparedness. So there is a Northern Ireland government-wide agenda to push forward on business preparedness. Really important to get the businesses in the right place. Rebecca, if I could just pick up on Colm's RASIF point as well. We're having official level conversations with the Commission around the access to RASIF, and I'm very confident that those conversations will resolve the issues that we have, and that there will be a mechanism in place for Northern Ireland to be able to access the information that is on the RASIF system. And then in relation to Con's question about goods at risk, Colm, we can't say very much more than what you're hearing in the media about goods at risk, because that is very much in the negotiating space.
Sorry, I reference goods at risk as being in the media recently. I'm thinking more of Northern Ireland qualifying goods, so that would be the goods coming the other way. Now, maybe there's nothing more can be said, Maria.
Sorry, I'm capturing both together, Colin. It's the same issue, yes.
It's very frustrating for everybody involved that we cannot get any further with this at this stage. Emily, and I think Theo had something to add as well.
Yeah, I think Theo can probably help us on Northern Ireland qualifying goods. Just on Ruth's question about relationships. So I think you asked if we were satisfied. I don't think we can ever be satisfied. We can always improve, but we do have lots of things in place to ensure that we're talking to the right people. So, for example, our briefing cell, which is our incident response mechanism, has Food Standards Scotland completely plugged into it. They operate a daily meeting. We attend when it speeds up and is being done daily, we attend DEFRA's Food Resilience Forum, which has got lots of actors coming and speaking at it every morning. And we're also well plugged into the Civil Contingency Secretariat system. So, and in addition, we've been making sure we've had, informal conversations with people where we need to. So, for example, last week, I had just a routine catch up with Pamela Byrne, who's the Chief Executive of Food Safety Authority in Ireland, just so that we had that conversation now. So we're doing our best, and there's a lot in place.
Can I just add a huge thanks to the team who are fronting this work. I know you've been stood up in incident mode for most of the year responding to COVID. And so I think, I'm sure the board would agree that it's huge thanks to everybody who now need to be ready and on the front foot from the 1st of January for that incident as well, or that situation to manage as well. So just huge thanks. Theo, did you want to just add on the Northern Ireland food points?
Yes, thank you, Heather. And just to address Colm's question really about the specific definition of a Northern Ireland qualifying good. So the UK government has laid the SI in Parliament that sets out the definition for a Northern Ireland qualifying good, and I can circulate the link to that. The priority has very much been on avoiding disruption and ensuring continuity at the end of the transition period for traders in Northern Ireland, which reflects the broader approach that's being taken in the first half of next year for GB-EU trade. And so it provides for unfettered access for goods in free circulation in Northern Ireland, so that if it's coming from Northern Ireland into GB, it will qualify as a Northern Ireland qualifying good. There's some specifics around that are set out in the SI, and I can share. It is part of a phased approach. So the existing the definition in the SI is intended to be no more than a bridge to a longer lasting regime. And that is being developed with Northern Ireland businesses and the Northern Ireland Executive, and the FSA has been participating in conversations with the Northern Irish food industry around what the longer term qualification looks like for agri-food, and that second phase of the qualification approach will come in next year. So hopefully that gives some assurance around what's in place for the 1st of January. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you ever so much for that. I think in terms of summing this up, just can I double check with the board that nobody had any further comments to make about the food compositional standards and labelling points? The way this is set out in the paper is in line with the way the board has looked at governance and the strategic priorities around this whole area of transition and our future arrangements. So unless somebody raises a hand now, I will assume that the board is content with the proposals that are set out in the paper. Thank you very much. And just, I think on behalf of the whole board, you've heard it plenty of times, but we really do want to thank the team who have been fronting this, but actually it's involved our whole staff just about in terms of on top of COVID-19 through this year, being ready for the challenges and the uncertainties of what's going to hit from the end of this month and into 2021. We absolutely recognise the demands that this situation is placing on you, and we really do appreciate the effort and the commitment that you're showing. And I think what I would like to signal is the board's confidence in our leadership team and in our staff to do their utmost to make what is going to be a challenging period as trouble-free as possible, recognising we do not have all the levers, the controls, or the solutions in our hands. And we'll seek in doing that to work as closely as we can with industry to make sure that the consumer interest and public health is properly protected and well served. I'll finish off by wishing Catherine very well. We hope you have a very happy retirement. Thank you. We'll move on to our next paper, which is an update on food hypersensitivity. We have Rebecca and Sushma. Rebecca, everybody knows. Sushma, you have met before, Head of Policy and Strategy for Food Hypersensitivity.
Thank you. And I'm conscious of time, Heather, so I'm going to hand straight over to Sushma, but I just wanted to say how pleased I am that we're able to bring this update, because I think you'll see just how much progress we've made. And just to remind everyone that the impact of COVID has been particularly difficult for some of our stakeholders in this programme, particularly the NHS and medical services with whom we partner for a lot of our research, and also obviously the hospitality industry, also key partners for us in this. So we've been very conscious of that in how we've progressed over the past year. But in spite of that, I think we've been able to make some real strides forward. So I'm going to ask Sushma just to briefly highlight some of those key points.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be presenting to you this morning. As Rebecca's mentioned, the Food Hypersensitivity Programme is a key priority for the Food Standards Agency, and as a consequence, the programme has been established and governance in place with resource. We have a 3-country approach, and we have Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland who are programme board members. We have continued to progress the work of food hypersensitivity, and the board paper indicates the progress we've made to date on various areas, from pre-packed direct sales, which comes into force on the 1st of October 2021, to the communication strategy, where we have pulled back some of our activities as a consequence of the pandemic. We've continued to progress work. It's been slow. Our research and evidence work, which supports the work of the Food Hypersensitivity Programme, has been slightly delayed as a consequence of the pandemic, but we have continued to deliver some of the key areas, such as our e-learning, our pre-packed direct sales. We are going to be launching an 18 to 21 campaign in the new year. The 2 main areas where we have started some key activities is in relation to considering a food allergy safety scheme. The board in January asked whether we could look at something similar to a food hygiene rating scheme, and we have begun early scoping activities in terms of research we require to underpin any particular scheme. So we've looked to see exactly what exists, what is available, how these schemes work, and as a consequence of that, we're also commissioning extra work for consumers with food hypersensitivity in terms of their needs, the information that they require, and what would be really useful. We're at the early stages of considering what potential approaches there may be. We will probably have to undertake further research. And I would like at this point just to pick up the point that was raised about Codex. We're Codex, the International Codex Alimentarius Commission has subcommittees. The Food Standards Agency is a co-chair with the United States and Australia. And recently in November, the stage 8 adoption by the Commission for the Code of Practice for food allergen management for food businesses was published. As part and parcel of our considerations and potential approaches, we will be looking at guidance, we will be looking at the parameters and taking stock, as well as the sort of policy aspects that might be appropriate in line with the guidance and the code of practice that's been set. The other key area that we are focusing on is precautionary allergen labeling. However, one of the key things that we're seeking from the board is an endorsement of some overarching principles which we'd like to adopt when we're considering the options and the approaches that come out of the research and the further work we'll need to do with consumers and also food businesses and local authorities in moving forward to see whether we can either endorse existing schemes which exist, evidence in Annex 3 of the paper, and also what food standards should be doing in this space outside of food hygiene rating schemes. The other key area of focus is precaution allergen labelling. This is a key area. It is quite clear that those with food hypersensitivities, which is about 1 or 2% of adults and 5 to 6% of children who are affected, food is central. So it's safe and trusted food. So the labelling is quite critical. Precaution allergen labelling is voluntary labelling, which actually indicates that there may be a risk of allergens in a product, but this is based around risk assessment by food businesses. We've noticed that there's an increase in this practice of using precaution allergen labelling and voluntary labelling, and we're looking to see how we can work with industry, consumers, to try and ensure that risk assessment is undertaken and that accurate information is provided. Again, we work internationally with the Codex Commission and the committee. The Codex Committee on Food Labelling is currently looking at thresholds, which are key for food businesses to assess whether allergens are cross-contaminated in products that they produce and whether there should be a indiscriminate use of these voluntary labelling practices. We feel that this is an area which is very, very complex, and we will need to work with industry, and industry needs to take a lead in trying to ensure these spaces and its uses. As I said, internationally, there is some work on threshold work, on harmonising thresholds and setting of standards. Again, Food Standards Agency is a co-chair, and we've contributed to nominations to an expert panel and also are contributing evidence to these international initiatives, which we will take on board and consider as part and parcel of our activities.
Sushma, thank you very much indeed. I think the board will be incredibly reassured and pleased that this amount of work has been able to be taken forward during COVID-19 and the pressures that have been on the FSA. And we won't need to go into detail on the work areas. One of the reasons that we have this area on every board agenda is so that we can just keep track of where it is, but particularly here, you're asking for us to endorse the approach that's been taken on a food allergy safety scheme and on precautionary allergen labelling. So could I ask if there was anything that board members wish to raise or share around those areas? Margaret.
Heather, I just wanted to say I have a son with allergies, but I don't think that's a conflict of interest. It's just an interest. This is a really fascinating paper. Yes, I totally really like those overarching principles. I think they're great. Just a couple of tiny points. I do think it's worth mentioning the precautionary allergen labelling, because we haven't really sort of chatted it in depth, but I think the work that the staff are doing on a deeper dive to find out why that's happening is a good idea, because I do think it can be quite dangerous, especially if it's increasing and then people with allergens just think it's back covering and don't take it seriously, which you've already identified. On the 18 to 21-year-olds, obviously that is a campaign that is going to come back, which is a good thing. And I just wondered if you could think about in the campaign providing some information on who you should go to if you're not satisfied with what an outlet is telling you, because I think, although we may know that the public are not totally clear on that necessarily. And then finally, the model for consumer information schemes, which is outlined in the annexes. Just this issue of the more we can base everything on firm evidence, because obviously there's a place for what consumers think about it, but that's very subjective. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Dave.
Thanks, Heather, and thank you to our colleagues for this paper and this update. 3 questions, I think. There might be 4, I've lost count. Trying to go through the paper in order and linking them back to the conclusions. We note in 2.4 about the comprehensive spending review. So I'm just interested as to whether we've had a chance to understand what the impact on our work will be, given the announcements made last week, where we haven't quite got the funding for our project-based activity we were looking for. Secondly, with reference to the sort of consumer announcement food allergy safety scheme. I kind of read through this paper, and I probably sit at one end of it, maybe at risk of oversimplifying it. I kind of read the activity that we're undertaking and wonder if we're at risk of overcomplicating it, or at least over complexing the process, which means it takes us a very, very long time to get to a reasonable communication scheme. My oversimplification is FHRS is an excellent scheme that focuses very much on food hygiene and food safety. If an establishment has got good food hygiene, it's got an excellent basis for ensuring that it's got good allergen control as well. So I would just be cautious about over complexing what we are trying to deliver when we might have a really strong foundation to build upon. So I'm not sure that I wholly endorse the proposed approach at the moment on our food allergy safety schemes. It might be a little complex. And finally, we're referring annexes to the quality information being available. Just wondered what timeline that might have now for when we will get that. We've been promised it for quite a while, but I appreciate it's quite a complex piece of work. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'm going to take a couple more comments because a lot of this is simply for officials to take on board and to note rather than to respond to now. Peter?
When our Welsh committee had a look at this last week, they were content with the principles that are being taken forward. There were some specific comments, however, of relevance. The first is about the accessibility of the information to those who are digitally excluded. And we noted the various things under the broad heading of physical means of getting the information across. They all seemed to be a very good approach. And the committee also asked whether the scheme information could be available in Welsh. So that's a very specific request. Second thing was about the precautionary labeling. A lot of concern about the potential of overuse. And I think I'm much reassured by what was said a moment ago about the work not only done by the FSA, but international cooperation on it even, in order to avoid the dangers of overuse. But that certainly is a huge area where firms could be using this as a cop-out and confusing everybody involved in it. And the third thing is that members were querying whether information which was set out in the Annex 3, whether any of it had been gathered in Wales. And the reason that they gave for that was that there are higher levels of both poverty and digital exclusion in Wales. Members of the committee thought that in any information gathering, therefore, that was a need to ensure that there was information being gathered in Wales. I make those observations, all of them stemming out of that committee discussion.
Thank you for that, Peter. Colm.
Thanks, Chair, and again, thanks for the team for a very comprehensive update. Just a couple of points, actually, and again, coming out of the NIFAC meeting last week. Similar comments that we've heard previously on PAL. How concerned should we be at the fact that we have almost doubled the use of that over the last relatively short period of years, and how does this compare internationally? So again, not looking for an answer to that, but it is something we should be conscious of. Secondly, if I've read the paper and my committee have read the paper correctly, there was a time we were considering using the FHRS system and adding into that. My reading of the paper is we're moving away from that, and that's to be welcomed, because I think the FHRS does a particular thing and does it very well, and not to be changed, but there are things that we can learn from that. And the final point raised by colleagues in the Northern Ireland Food Advisory Committee was around MenuCal, which I know is not used right across the UK. I think it's certainly used in Northern Ireland and Scotland, as I understand, but it does have some allergen information which is being developed. And is that something the team have looked at, or perhaps could look at, to see if there's something that could benefit the discussion? Thank you.
All very useful points there. Thank you. And Timothy.
Thanks, Heather. Just a quick one really around looking at the cost and benefits of the approach, particularly in the light of the point Dave made around the spending review. But certainly our case on this would be even further strengthened the more we can look at the incremental benefits over the current cost burden. And that's not just around finance, but that's also about the public health interventional benefits we will get through this. So just to underscore that plea that we look to try and get the economic model into place, because I think it would be welcomed. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I think on that economic model, the amazing work that we have done over the last couple of years to really start to assess the cost of illness when it comes to food hypersensitivity is a very valuable input to us being able to reinforce the significance of these measures and the steps that we could take and the economic model. Emily, do you want to come in on that point about the spending review? And then Sushma, there might be one or two things you want to pick up there, but we're not, it's just input, so we're not expecting you to answer every point. Emily.
Just on the spending review, so we, the Chancellor made his announcement last week. In my update to the Business Committee, which the board will see, I think today, and then is published on Friday, I set out what our settlement has been. We have been given a little bit more than we were spending last year, but not as much as we hoped for. And that does mean that programmes like Sushma's won't have the full amount of money that we were hoping for. We're now in a period of business planning, so we're having to review our plans and retract our ambitions, and just consider how we can shuffle bits of resource around the agency. I'm hopeful that, this is a very clear priority for the board, food hypersensitivity, and this year we created some additional posts in Sushma's team which have made the difference that you can see in front of you. So it will still get as much priority as we can give it in the light of the resources, but we've got some thinking to do before we can finally say what the output of that will be.
Thank you for that. Sushma, are there any other particular points you wanted to come back on?
I just have 2 or 3 points, Heather, very quickly. There's reference to FHRS and why can't we piggyback off FHRS? I'd like to assure the board that we are considering all options, including FHRS. However, it should be borne in mind that FHRS is a hygiene scheme, and we're talking about food standards and allergen management, which is slightly different in the context. However, just a reassurance that we will be keeping all options and all approaches open whilst we do this preliminary scoping work. It's not necessarily a case that we'll reinvent the wheel. We may actually also look at existing schemes which might be useful to actually do standard setting in that space. I think that's one particular point I wanted to make. The second point, it's noted about Wales. I'm sorry that I can't at this stage indicate whether Welsh members were interviewed during the process, but we will certainly take that back to the researchers on that particular point. In relation to accessibility, the reason why we want the board to endorse some of the principles are the fact that we are attuned with the accessibility needs of those who are not digitally able, as opposed to those who are young and use apps and websites. So this is one of the reasons why we wanted an overarching principle that actually allows us to consider both particular options in view of what's been said. I think those are the key questions I'd like to address, Heather. unless there's anything specific people would like me to answer. And internationally, we're in tune. We co-chair, so we're in tune with all the developments happening in PAL for threshold work, labelling work. And also, as I said, we will be looking at the code of practice for allergen management for food businesses as we move forward and progress the work.
Sushma, thank you very much for that. Very good to hear. So the board does endorse the approach to taking forward the work on the food allergy safety scheme and on precautionary allergen labelling, and is very pleased with the progress that you've been able to make in those other areas as well, and some good input there for you to reflect on. Thank you. Turn now for updates from the chairs of the food advisory committees. Colm, NIFAC.
Chair, thank you. NIFAC have met twice in the last month or so, an open meeting on the 21st of October and a closed meeting to discuss the board papers last week. At our open meeting, unfortunately, one of our speakers from the food industry wasn't able to attend, Michelle Sherlow. We'll get Michelle back again shortly. We did discuss the future of the food system, which has been led by Joy Alexander, a senior colleague from DARA, and she's working very closely with the work going on through Henry Dimbleby's team in England to make sure that we're learning from each other and have a relative consistent approach across the UK. The other big thing happening within NIFAC is recruitment. The competition has just started. We're looking to replace 3 members whose terms expire on the 1st of April and an additional member whose second term expires in July. We started the competition. There's a significant outreach plan to ensure that we get a good pool of candidates in. I'm advised we've already received our first application, and it only went live, I think, at the beginning of the week, so that came in quite quickly. We have the initiation panel meeting next week, myself, Maria, and an independent member, and we're hoping to have interviews in the last week in January with recommendations going to the Minister for Health. Unfortunately, he wasn't able, just given the pressure on health departments across the UK with the pandemic, he won't have anybody involved, but he is quite happy for us to proceed.
Thank you for that, Colm. And Peter.
Like Northern Ireland, we're also in the course of recruiting. We need 4 new members with effect from the 1st of April, and extensive advertising is currently underway, including on social media. So we're hopeful of having a good spectrum of applicants. Second thing is that in addition to meeting to consider board papers and business and so on, periodically we have a look at the entire food landscape in Wales, and we're going to do exactly that on the 4th of February, which will be assessing the impacts of COVID and of the end of the transition period. And as a result of that, we'll see what particular aspects have an impact on the work of the FSA. As a new chair, I've also attended some online events run by food industry bodies and noted significant changes underway, particularly thinking in terms of the difficulty of accessing EU markets. There's a lot of talk about, and a lot of planning indeed, of much more trade with other parts of the world. And when you have new corridors of trade, you have new risks. And so there could be issues for the Food Standards Agency, again, arising out of that. Those, I think, are the points to report. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And if anybody in Wales or Northern Ireland has been listening to this board meeting and realising how interesting our work is, then do look at the opportunity to apply to join our advisory committees in Wales and Northern Ireland. It gives you greater insight, and we really value their ability to get us closer to the consumer interest and to the stakeholder interests that affect those 2 countries. And it adds incredible value to our work, not only in Wales and Northern Ireland, but across all our geographies. That brings us to the end of the agenda. So I had one other piece of board business, which was me being able to say goodbye to you all. So what would I joined this board in 2015, and I think I would want to tell you that it's been an absolute privilege to work with you all and to be able to contribute in just a small way to being sure that public trust in food is warranted and is sustained. When I joined in 2015, the FSA was in a rather different place. Some of our exec colleagues around the table will recall it. Relationships with industry weren't where we might have hoped, and we'd spent quite a lot of time in our agenda, perhaps at some distance from our core purposes, and most importantly, Brexit was not on the horizon, and there was some rebuilding and some repositioning to be done. We've absolutely reinvigorated science at the heart of the FSA. I think it's much more visible in the board's business, but also we've strengthened it within and in terms of our external independent science, which is so important. We've put the National Food Crime Unit on a proper footing. It was long overdue. And despite ministers still stonewalling our request for the powers for that unit to fight food fraud and food crime, it is still managing to make a difference and to improve the protection of the public. The FSA successfully made the case for compulsory CCTV in abattoirs. It's quite salutary to return to board papers in 2015 and 2016 and just remember how often the board was talking about failures in animal welfare. We are now in a much better place, and industry is in a much better place on that, and that's something that the consumer is grateful for and we should all be grateful for. We shouldn't ever let up on our zero tolerance approach, but we've really moved in a positive way there. And I think we do now have government support in England for our campaign to make the FHRS display sticker mandatory in England, and that next step does now lie with ministers. I also think the board and the FSA has done some really good work on reshaping the regulatory regime domestically. We haven't been able to get as far as we hoped, and that's because of Brexit, but we have built some firm foundations. Some of them we were advised were impossible to build, and we've done it, and the way is set. And I think also perhaps those who argued for some time outside the FSA that we didn't need to make any change because there was no imminent crisis might just reflect 4 years on that it's unwise for a regulator to wait for an imminent collapse in the system before choosing to act. If you look at the challenges we're now facing in the operation of digital markets in food, where consumer habits are changing in the blink of an eye, the intense pressure on essential local authority personnel and the explosion in delivery services, I don't think we need many more proof points of the need for reforming the way in which we help businesses comply and have the assurance that they are complying with the rules. But for me, it was really fitting that the two items on my last board meeting agenda were EU transition and food hypersensitivity. I do hope that in years to come, consumers and business and perhaps even politicians will appreciate and will value the replacement regulatory systems that we've built for Brexit. It has been a huge undertaking. We have recreated what exists in the EU specifically for the territories that we serve. But I think what's admirable is the care that we've taken to build in levels of openness and transparency, which I do genuinely believe are world leading, so that we can be sure the FSA is always a source of truth about food. And I will be urging my eventual successor not to unpick those checks and balances and that commitment to openness and transparency. Sometimes it is going to be awkward and difficult and challenging to operate in that way under the pressure that we will have once the UK is taking responsibility for its own trade arrangements. And they won't always suit ministers. But doing things behind closed doors will erode trust. And I'm really proud that this board, for example, insisted on doing its Brexit development and planning in the open. And then when I attended my select committee pre-appointment hearing 5 years ago, I talked then about the need to do more to support and protect millions of people across this country who have food allergies or food intolerances. And I am really proud to have been part of an FSA that's always cared about this, but in the last 3 years has truly moved up several gears in the attention we've given it and the commitment we've made to treat food hypersensitivity as seriously as it deserves. I added it up. I've had 3 CEOs, 3 deputy chairs, made a dozen board appointments, and had an astonishing 10 public health ministers to engage with in this period. But it has been easy to do a good job. I'll let you judge whether I have, but I should have done because of the value and the wisdom and the style the board has contributed to the way we deliver our statutory purposes. It is always easy to work with good people, in my experience, but also the willingness of industry and local authorities and NGOs to engage and to help shape outcomes which serve consumers better. And of course, the commitment and the standards that are set and the hard work of FSA staff. So I'm absolutely confident that I'm leaving the board in very capable hands, that we have a really strong exec team, and they're excellently led by Emily as our chief executive. And I'm also proud to leave the FSA as it enjoys its highest sustained levels of public trust. So I'm going to bequeath to you a Dutch proverb that's been my guide for the last 5 years. Trust arrives on foot and leaves on horseback. Don't forget. Thank you very much.
Heather, I wonder if I could say a few words.
No, because you might embarrass me.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your leadership of the FSA. And it's been an absolute pleasure to be a part of this board and to work with you and colleagues. You've steered us, as you've just highlighted, you've steered us through substantial change. I mean, the ambition to be a modern, effective regulator has been absolutely clear from the outset. You know, you absolutely have put science and data at the heart of the work of the FSA, strengthened the evidence base that we use. Yes, we've started the journey of reforming regulation and put huge foundations there for that quest to be a modern regulator. You've mentioned the National Food Crime Unit. Again, great strides there, more to do. And really putting food hypersensitivity on the agenda has been a huge strategic achievement as well. And all along that period of time, enhancing food safety and never, ever forgetting the importance of public health and the consumer interest. And that's been evident in all the work that we've done. And then on top of that, leaving the European Union and the work that designing new systems, huge amount of strategic leadership needed to guide us and the teams through that. And then who would have guessed a pandemic as well? So, you know, you've taken it in your stride, you've done it with good humour and always involved the board in understanding and supporting you and the team in agreeing the way forward on many of those issues. So we're absolutely indebted to you. And we wish you well in your new role as Master of St John's College in Cambridge. You do leave the FSA across England, Wales and Northern Ireland in a stronger place. It's quite clear to see, certainly to me, and it's a testament to your contribution and your leadership throughout this period. You will be missed greatly, but don't forget you are back next week for Business Committee. And we will say goodbye to you properly at the end of January. So we look forward to having still a few more weeks with you. But again, I'm sure colleagues will agree, we are indebted and grateful for everything you've done for the FSA. Thank you.
Ruth, thank you very much indeed. That's very kind of you. Thank you. So there is a meeting of our Business Committee next Tuesday on Zoom, if you'd like to join, 9:30 a.m. And the next FSA board meeting will take place on Tuesday, the 9th of March from 9:30 a.m, again via Zoom. And that concludes the board meeting for December. Thank you very much, everybody.